So I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about Speaker Pelosi's announcement yesterday, my visit to Cairo for COP27, the results of the election, and just about any other topics as we proceed to what now is likely to be a pretty ambitious lame duck schedule. And so why don't I go in the sequential order that I've just noted, and that is first that Speaker Pelosi's announcement yesterday brings to a close an era in American politics that in many ways has been unparalleled. If you consider war through 9/11, if you consider the pandemic, presidential impeachments, and the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th, she presided over the Democratic caucus for pretty close to 2 decades. I've had a long-standing relationship with her. I've been one of her confidants. I had a pretty good idea this was coming, and she confided to me in New York about a month ago, and she also had a long talk with me on the plane back from Cairo and COP27. But I think her finest moment was at approximately 3:40 a.m. on January 7th, when she marched the House of Representatives back in to regular order. The institution had been under assault for the better part of a day. The windows were broken, seating was fractured, doors were ripped off, and we calmly voted to certify the results of a presidential election. I can't tell you how important that is, given the fact that within the constitutional framework that we all enjoy, I think that part of the outgrowth of that last Tuesday was a return to some normal conversation in America. That is not to suggest for one moment that much of the fiery language that from time to time is used is also automatically going to subside. But I do think that the result of last Tuesday indicates that the election deniers were roundly defeated across the country. I think that we can turn the page on part of that. And as we proceed to a new chapter, we can get back to perhaps a more better understanding of the issues that on both sides promote democracy. I also thought her speech yesterday was superb. I didn't see it as self-serving. I didn't see it as a moment of her talking about her. Instead, she talked about what had happened in the House of Representatives. So if you consider the ACA, if you consider what we were able to do with pandemic legislation, yes, the first rounds were bipartisan. The second rounds mostly bipartisan. And I think that those issues saved the American economy and have promoted economic growth, considering that the unemployment rate in America right now is at about 3.7%. Always using the example of Dr. Fauci's warning on March 11th of 2020, when he said that I want to predict to all of you what's coming. By April of 2020, America had lost 22 million jobs. Every one of those jobs has been returned, and there are 10.7 million jobs in America right now that go unanswered. So I think, again, framing Nancy Pelosi's career cannot be understated in terms of what we achieved, and I take great satisfaction in many of the tasks that she personally and professionally gave to me. We completed them. When I hugged her yesterday, and I said, "We've had a great run, Madam Speaker." I also thought that what was frequently missed, largely because of the amplified and unnecessary rhetoric that surrounded her historic time as Speaker, was the fact that she raised 5 children before she got into politics. Pretty remarkable. And she always points out, as she did yesterday, that she was a homemaker before she became House Speaker. And I think she was formidable. The other side will say that. And I also thought it was pretty interesting that Newt Gingrich, who tended to unite Democrats everywhere, Newt Gingrich said he believed she was the most important speaker in American history. I share that agreement. So be happy to take questions about COP27. Be able to take questions about Speaker Pelosi. Oh, and by the way, Hakeem Jeffries knew weeks ago that I was supporting him. I kept his confidence and he kept mine, because you had to wait until these changes were announced before you could actually publicize them. But he knew based on a visit he made to me weeks ago. And then coincidentally, yesterday morning, he visited with me. And we both were still positing theories, because there had been no formal announcement. We had been alerted in the Democratic caucus that the Speaker would take to the floor at 12:10. And I said to Hakeem, I questioned him about a couple of other possibilities. I said, look, I'm for you. You know that. How are you going to handle a couple of other personalities in our caucus? And he said, well, those conversations are ongoing. And I also want to give a great shout out to Catherine Clark, who is likely to become the minority whip, and to Pete Aguilar from California, three people that I have supported during my time in Congress, and enthusiastically support the three of them now. I can't wait to see Paul Kane from the Washington Post. I carefully explained to him at the congressional baseball game back in, I think, July or August, over beers at the ballpark, how Democrats were going to do very well in the congressional election cycle. And he queried me and looked at me kind of a bit of a jaundiced view, but I did point out to him, tell me who's going to get beat. These are candidate against candidate races. Generic polling questions don't work. And on the morning of the election, the generic poll had Republicans up by 1. And I kept pointing out, tell me who's going to beat Liz Slotkin, who's going to beat Steve Horsford. I know these names don't come to you readily, but I kept saying these candidates are amongst the best that I have served with in Congress, and I knew they were going to win. So they were ready for it. I helped recruit them, I helped vet them, and yes, I helped finance them. And we've been a very good team. We came back feeling pretty good because about the prospects of what comes in 2 years. But by all norms and all the talk that had permeated punditry, which now, by the way, from 2016 to 2018 to 2020, and now to 2022, it leaves a lot to be desired. And the last point I'll make is that it's hard for reporters today to talk about process because of the way that news is flashed at us and the way that news is consumed. It's instant. It's always right in front of you. But I think that process takes a long time. It's laborious, and that because we've had now for 25 years, more and more members of Congress get elected to Congress by running against Congress, that they satisfy themselves by saying, well, they can never buy into the big deal, which time and again we demonstrated that you can do with patience. Questions?
How much of a role do you think that redistricting played in what happened in the House? Three Democratic seats were flipped in Florida, 3 were flipped in New York. There were aggressive gerrymanders in both states. Republicans challenged the Democratic gerrymander in New York, and Republicans prevailed in their package in Florida.
Well, Republicans won in Florida with a clear gerrymandered map, but this is what happens when you have a governor and a legislature that's comprised of the same party. And I think actually in Florida it's 4 seats. And then in New York, just the opposite occurred. It was a court decision as opposed to a legislative decision. The legislative decision conceivably could have given us up to 5 seats. Instead, the court decision makes it look as though we would, in the end, win 1 seat. But the vagaries, yeah, no, I'll come right back to you. Yeah, no, the vagaries of court decisions, and I think it's fair to say that in New York, the Democratic Party in New York overplayed its hand.
I was going to say, the Democrats have lost the House. What is going to be your approach to Congress at this time?
Well, my approach is the same as it's always been, where we can find accommodation and find agreement on behalf of the American people. I intend to do it. But I also understand the historic role of the opposition, and that's to oppose. We at the Ways and Means Committee have written seismic legislation I was able to get Republicans to vote for USMCA. 194 of them voted for the largest trade agreement in the history of the world, which I authored, and 195 Democrats voted for it. In the retirement space, Secure and now Secure 2.0 that awaits action in the Senate, which I assume will happen in the next couple of weeks. These two retirement bills are stupendous in their outcomes, and unanimously Republicans voted for it. So I hope, because it leads into your question about the lame duck session, I would hope that we can clear the table of a series of contentious issues that become less contentious once the election is over.
You mentioned it was part of the recruiting process or part in as well. Tell me a bit about what made you decide that these were the people who should be running the Democratic leadership.
Well, I think that they share my view, as quoted in the Globe this morning, and that is you can have all the ideas you want, but if you can't get 218 votes, you don't get to implement them. And I long ago gave up on the argument, I'd rather be right than win. I think that satisfies a small part of the Democratic Party. And I think Pelosi proved time and again that getting 218 votes was the real challenge to write historic legislation, and we did it. But I also would say that I've known Catherine Clark for a long time. I've known Hakeem Jeffries for a long time, Pete Aguilar as well. And they've all been supporters of mine in the inside of the institution, which I think bears consequence as well. But they are timed for the moment. And that is, we need to be a big political party. I used the example, I congratulated her yesterday. I've been very helpful to her. Sharice Davids in Kansas, she won comfortably in Kansas. I mean, that's the lesson that the Democratic caucus needs to hear. And it's ironic that we could hold on in Kansas and lose 4 seats in New York.
Do you have any comment about Eversource increasing their rates of patent?
Well, I hope they won't, and I also know that part of it's a reflection of the time, but the Attorney General's office and I will have oversight of that request. Look, we all understand the issue of supply and demand. We understand the punitive action that Putin has taken in Ukraine, and that certainly has contributed to these price increases everywhere. I also think it also is a good piece of advice for taking us to a renewable future where we're not dependent upon just the vagaries of the marketplace as it relates to oil and coal. So I hope that those announced requests will not prevail in their entirety, largely because the Attorney General is going to have considerable leeway on those requests.
What does the switch to Republican majority mean for some local priorities? I'm thinking East-West Rail moving forward, and other ongoing issues.
Well, on the East-West Rail issue, I mean, that will be a priority for me now for the next 2 years for sure. The money is there. That's done. It's a fait accompli. The governor has assured me that he intends to sign the necessary documentation, and Maura Healey has assured me for months that she intends to follow through on what Charlie Baker does. So I think that now it's just a matter of putting the plan in place. Remember, for years the argument was, where's the money? Congress produced the money. The state is about to receive, or has received, $9 billion in infrastructure money, and I am going to have Pete Buttigieg has been invited to the constituency to talk about it, and Marielle has, I've asked him to speak to the Massachusetts delegation quickly in the next 2 or 3 weeks to talk about that priority, so we're all on the same page.
What does it mean for the ongoing issue of Trump's taxes and degrees on the committee?
Well, as you know, I've refrained from commenting on the specifics of the case, other than to say that it is now in front of the Supreme Court, and it's in the hands of Chief Justice Roberts. So we'll see.
With the shakeup in the House leadership, with switching over to the Republicans, why did you decide to go for a high majority minority leader?
Well, I'm going to quote two great, Barbara Conable, who I expect most of you don't remember. He was the top Republican on the Ways and Means Committee. And the day that Speaker McCormick announced that he was going to retire, he leaned over to Chairman Rostenkowski and he said to Chairman Rostenkowski, will you be interested in becoming Speaker? And Rostenkowski said, I've got the best job in the House of Representatives. And just before I became chairman, I met Paul Ryan in the gym, and he said, Richie, you got the best job in Congress. So that was the plan. I'm sticking with it.
So how do you feel about in another month or two, you won't have that best job in Congress?
Won't be good for humility.
The East-West rail funding is still, it can't be held. It can't be held.
No, the challenge with the East-West rail funding is that the federal government, we did that. Congress did it, the infrastructure package, which was bipartisan, by the way. I think 12 Republicans voted for it in the Senate, and I think 10 in the House. Transportation money comes to the states. Then governors and secretaries of transportation, they decide how the money is allocated. So Maura Healey will largely decide how the money is spent, but I think Governor Baker can secure the paperwork that's necessary to get that done.
And do you think there are moderate Republicans who are get legislation passed as a body?
Well, I think a lot of it is going to be based on the tenor of the time in which we live. So I think where you can find a cooperative spirit, you try to find it. And at the same time, I think that there are still about 150 Republicans in the House who voted not to certify the election of Joe Biden. So that will be a challenge for sure.
We've been hearing a lot about reaching across the aisle, compromises as we're heading into this new split, but what are some issues that you don't think compromise on?
Well, I think that, as you know, I vehemently opposed their tax cut bill in December of 2017. And if they attempt to extend that, we intend to resist. And it'll be very hard for them to extend it with a Democratic Senate and a Democratic president. So out of that, I see some room. And I'm in favor of an expanded child credit, which we did for the better part of a year, which American families benefited from enormously. And I would be willing, as part of a compromise on that, to expand the research and development credit, which we all like. And Massachusetts, as you know, benefits mightily from research and development. So those are two plausible openings, I think, that we might be able to get done. Yeah.
But anything that you don't feel like you can compromise on?
Well, I don't intend to compromise on their position on extending their tax cuts. I think those tax cuts overwhelmingly went to people at the very top, and it did not promote the economic growth that they said that we would have. More jobs have been created in the last 2 years with Joe Biden, almost 10.5 million, than were created during the first 2 years of the former administration.
There's a presentation recently at the Economic Development Council about housing, and one of the discussions was how Worcester really blew up when rail was connected to Boston. In turn, Springfield gets connected, but the actual housing stock that isn't ready for a huge infusion of the population. You see the federal government able to play a role in housing.
I mean, the housing overwhelming is still based on income elasticity. And you can have a really nice house out here in central and western Massachusetts when you compare it with a home in Boston for considerably better price. So the experience I always have with rail in Worcester, because I have represented Worcester County for a long time, and at one time all the way into Norfolk County, outside of Boston. And Worcester has benefited from rail. The Tufts Veterinary School is located in Grafton, Massachusetts, which I represented for 20 years. And it's an indication of what can happen. So the scientists at the veterinary school, they jump on that train and they go back and forth. So that rail link at Union Station in Worcester is very important. So I think moving it now from Worcester to Springfield onto Pittsfield, the evidence is pretty clear.
One of the things the Republicans announced yesterday was an improvement to the Hunter Biden laptop. What do you think for it. That doesn't sound very...
High-minded?
Pardon?
High-minded?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I expect they've advertised and they've telegraphed that's where they intend to head. But I also think that the public's interest in that will wane as time goes on if it looks as though there's not an emphasis on continuing to combat the pandemic, continuing economic growth, and making America more competitive in the world marketplace. I was there when I saw some of the overreach over the years, and the American people will get it if that becomes the sole reason for existence. Now, it's also oversight is a constitutional responsibility. I understand that. But the manner in which it's exercised in terms of restraint is also very important. The public understands proportionality. And we're in this battle with inflation, as you know. And if it looks as though there's more emphasis on these investigations than there is on righting the inflationary, well, now downward trend, but in creating jobs, I think that the public will react as well. Questions? No?
Can you speak to how not being in ways and means might affect the agenda?
Well, I think most of what we've done is now in the stage of implementation, so we've yet to feel all of the effects. Infrastructure, the rescue package, the CARES Act. One that I'm really proud of is the multi-employer pension plan relief that we offered. And another story that has been underplayed is what we did to save the post office. That all came from the Ways and Means Committee. And one of the things that was superlatively greeted in Cairo was the Inflation Reduction Act, $369 billion of tax credits. And I'm telling you, I've been at this for a long time, it is receiving rave reviews everywhere as to what we were able to do to combat climate change. It was highlighted by international parties that we met with. The congratulatory notes came far and wide. And as COP27 plays out tomorrow, I hope that it will remain the basis of the conversation of America keeping its word, because we did in a big, big way.
During the pandemic, the supply line issue that came up of concern was pharmaceuticals manufactured in China. Is there anything planned to address that?
Well, if you remember, one of the in the President's rescue package, we were able to address the issue of prescription drug pricing and putting that cap on at $2,000, limiting insulin, I think, expenditure to $35. Those were huge achievements, and they were reflected, by the way, in the election cycle, what we were able to do there. And that came from the Ways and Means Committee as well. Yep.
Well, what are your priorities for the lame duck session coming up?
Well, I've been quoting with national press, and now I'll reinforce it with local press. People are trying to predict what's going to come in the lame duck cycle. And I've been saying it to the reporters as I did yesterday, and actually some of them said they're going to do it. I pointed out to them yesterday that they should all watch the movie Waking Ned Devine. Then you won't write about anything being dead.
Okay. I'll put it on my list.
It's worth it. It's worth it.
Okay.
All right? Okay, thank you all very much.